Welcome everyone, Christine here with a discussion about Hyenas and its cancellation. Sega has decided to pull the plug on the game. Makes sense, they kinda had to. The game was going to be an utter disaster on launch. It is a bit surprising for a company to invest so many resources in a game, and make no mistake, they did invest a significant amount of resources in Hyenas, and for them to pull the plug even before it's launched. But given the situation in the shooter market, I think Hyenas was just going to be a failure. Forget how the Total War community feels about Hyenas. You gotta understand, as a shooter, it would not have done well. So, what exactly is Sega having to say about it? Not what Creative Assembly is saying about it, what Sega is saying about it. They notify that it has resolved to implement structural reforms in the consumer area, mainly at its European bases, at the board of directors meeting held on September 28, 2023. In accordance with the decision, the company expects to record a record loss for the fiscal year ending on March 31st, 2024. Now, the crucial aspect here is that they will implement several reforms at European bases, which are determined at this time. In response to lower profitability, we have reviewed the title portfolio of each development base in Europe, and the resulting action will be to cancel Hyenas and some unannounced titles under development. Accordingly, we'll implement a write-down of work in progress for titles under development. Now, it is interesting to ask exactly what they're canceling that hasn't been announced just yet, but we don't know yet. We might find out in the future, might be shooter related. Hopefully it's not Total War related. And they will also implement a reduction of various fixed expenses at several group companies in relevant regions centered on the Creative Assembly Ltd. We expect to incur one-time expenses related to reduction of fixed expenses, and they will consider measures to improve profitability in European bases apart from above. We will announce the specific details and impact from them as soon as we make a decision. Yes, the translation is not necessarily the best in the world. As a result of the implementation of the structural reform described above in the consumer area, we expect to record record losses of approximately 14.3 billion yen for a fiscal year ending at the end of March 31st, 2024. But there are no changes to the full year consolidated operating results forecast for the fiscal year at this time. Now, what does this mean, by the way? Like, what exactly does this all mean? Well, if you convert yen to dollars, and I could be very wrong on this, but if you convert yen to dollars, you end up with the company losing about $100 million in that year alone. So it's 93 million or close to 93 million that they are going to be losing in that particular fiscal year. It's obviously not a great situation for them to find themselves, but they went all in on a title that just wasn't going to do all that well. And now they're, well, paying for that mistake. What can I say? And because of that mistake, Total War has suffered a fairly significant amount given Sega's decisions. When I say they went all in, they spent a significant amount of money. They tasked a lot of developers. I think there were hundreds of developers in Creative Assembly working on Hyenas. They probably hired a bunch of people just to work on the project because they expected to go full-on development with Hyenas. And now Hyenas has failed, and they are going to be firing quite a few people from the company. It's not a great situation, and all we can hope for right now is that going forward, it's not going to have too much of a negative impact on their other titles, really. It's not just even Total War. I mean, I would like to see other games from Creative Assembly that are just Total War, because I like Alien Isolation. I think it was a great game, but it does seem to me that Creative Assembly right now screwed up in a major way. It is a question like, why did they decide to even focus on Hyenas? What were they expecting would happen? Because if you look at a shooter market, there was very little chance the Hyenas is going to compete on the shooter market. In particular, because it's this kind of, it would have competed with other Battle Royale games, and right now with Battle Royale, it's the free-to-play situation. So they wanted to have a game that you would pay to be able to play, and it's like, you've got Apex, you've got Warzone, you've got other things available. You're competing in that market space, and you're going to sell full copies of the game. Now, there was speculation that they might have changed it to a free-to-play model before launch, but they were looking at statistics, and for all the discussion that can be had at times about companies, like gaming companies in particular, just being blind, they didn't know it was going to be a disaster. It was a dead man walking for quite a while now, forgetting how the Total War community felt about Hyenas, because we do know that Creative Assembly tasked a lot of people, even people that have worked on Total War games, they tasked a lot of people to work on Hyenas. I do kind of wonder if they knew before the fiasco of Shadows of Change if it was not going to work out quite as intended, and that's the reason they raised the price with Shadows of Change. But now Creative Assembly is in a trouble spot, because let's look at where Creative Assembly is right now as a company. Hyenas is gone, and they've lost a lot of money for that. They decided that they would rather lose the money right now to not even release it than to try releasing it and for it to just fail at launch. That's how bad the situation is. Warhammer 3, declining player base, plenty of people pissed off over Shadows of Change. Now, there is the possibility of Warhammer 3 doing well. We saw this with the Forge of the Chaos Dwarfs. Like, despite months and months and months of complaints from the community, when Forge of the Chaos Dwarfs came out, plenty of people did buy it, plenty of people did play it, and player numbers surged up. So there's still plenty of people that are just looking for good content for Warhammer 3, and if Creative Assembly were to release good content and fixes, they could get a lot of people back. What they're doing right now with the hot fixes, and generally what I think they're doing in general as a company, is like, they did not necessarily expect for things to go as badly as they did. There's also the speculation from other content creators that, I've talked with people, and there's a number of people who think that Creative Assembly didn't probably expected that their statement would help things with regards to Shadows of Change, which is a bit of an odd situation, I have to say, because I'm not sure how they thought that was going to go well, because it certainly wasn't going to go well. Then again, I am of the perspective that Shadows of Change, even with a lower price, even without that statement, would have done pretty poorly. The reason it would have done poorly is it would have taken people 2 minutes flat to figure out that there's a lack of changes for Kislev, there's a lack of changes for Kairos, the issues with the Changeling campaign, etc., and to decide, I'm not going to bother with this DLC. I mean, Yan Bo is great, sure, but that's about it. It certainly wasn't worth it. Like, even at the lower price, even at the price of the Champions of Chaos DLC, I don't think Shadows of Change is really that worth it as a DLC pack. That's my perspective. Because Champions of Chaos did a lot more. Like, what Champions of Chaos did for the Warriors of Chaos as a race was significantly more than what was done with Shadows of Change. That's my perspective. So Warhammer 3 has a messy situation. Now, Creative Assembly, as I stated, could improve that situation, but at the same time, like, there's a lot of bitterness right now from the community because of the way CA has handled things for quite a few months now. Actually, since the launch of Immortal Empires, or beta, or rather since the launch of Warhammer 3. People are just sick and tired of waiting and waiting and waiting for fixes that aren't coming. And they're sick and tired of patches coming out for the game that do more to break things that they had fixed previously even. And then there's Total War Pharaoh. I'm going to say it outright. Total War Pharaoh is dead on arrival. And I'm not talking about the quality of the game. I'm not talking about like how I feel about the game. My personal feelings on the matter are irrelevant. I'm just talking about the lack of interest from the community. A lot of people just aren't interested in it. I think one particular viewer put it best. It's like, I didn't pay money for Troy, and I picked it up, played it for like half an hour, and then I quit. Now they are doing Troy 2.0, and they're asking me money to play it in the first place. I am not interested. That's one sentiment. Other people have different sentiments, of course, but regardless of that, it is very, very clear that Pharaoh is not going to do very well as a game, which is a shame in quite a few respects from my perspective. As someone who, I like Troy on an idea level. The execution of things in Troy was not the best, but Pharaoh is just not going to do well. Future DLC of Thrones of Decay. Well, given how Creative Assembly has screwed it up, which has changed right now, a lot of people are just wondering how they're going to do Thrones of Decay. Basically, for Warhammer 3, it does come down to how they're going to handle Thrones of Decay. If they screw up with Thrones of Decay, that might be it. Pharaoh not going to do well. So CA in itself as a company right now is probably in the worst position that they've been in quite a few years, really. I mean, Warhammer, Rome 2's launch, rather. Rome 2's launch was a disaster. The disaster we're seeing unfolding right now is worse than that, because they just had a big game that they put a lot of money, effort. Like, say what you will about Rome 2. It did at least sell a lot of copies. It did piss a lot of people off, how it was handled, but it did sell at least a huge number of copies. So they did make their money back. Well, Hyenas, they're not making their money back. That's over. So what happens now? Well, I think this is the point where CA as a company either improves things, handle DLC better for Warhammer 3, handle Total War games in general better, handle their future projects better, or they simply go under as a company. That's my perspective. Because while Sega is obviously not just going to pull the plug on them, but if there's enough disasters stacking on top of each other, and if they lose a lot of money on the subject, they might, at the very least, they might downsize the company by a fairly significant amount, which is not a great situation, to be clear on that. When you're looking at it, I just don't understand what exactly they were thinking. Really, I'm just bewildered. Apparently, they had thought about Hyenas for quite a few years now. And now they just, like, it's not even dead on arrival, it's dead before arrival. I suppose we will see what CA decides to do going forward. Does seem to me, based on like all the hot fixes we are getting and some of the changes like we've seen with the marketing of Pharaoh, that they kind of woke up to the reality of their situation. Eventually, reality does kick you back awake from your dreams and delusions, and this seems to have been the case right now for CA for Sega. We'll see what they do going forward. Quasine signing out. Don't forget to subscribe, like, and enable notifications, and stay tuned for more.